Mia, a young black girl, is spotted alone at a gas station every night by Sheriff Hank during his patrols. One night, when he uncovers the heartbreaking reason behind her sleeping in the area, it shatters him. Just as hope begins to emerge, an unexpected secret surfaces, one that could turn everything upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Sheriff Hank Douglas leaned back in his patrol car, his weathered hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The quiet streets of his small rural town stretched out before him, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. As he drove slowly through the familiar roads, a heavy sigh escaped his lips. At 58, Hank had seen his fair share of life's ups and downs. The loss of his beloved wife, Sarah, 3 years ago had left a void in his heart that seemed impossible to fill. Now, with retirement looming on the horizon, he found himself questioning the very purpose that had driven him for so long. "What difference am I really making anymore?" he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the engine. The monotony of his nightly patrols had become a stark reminder of how lonely his life had become. Each passing day felt like a carbon copy of the last, blending into a blur of routine and solitude. Hank's eyes, still sharp despite the years, scanned the empty sidewalks out of habit. As he approached the local gas station, something caught his attention. A small figure sat huddled on the curb, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the convenience store. Hank slowed the car, his brow furrowing in concern. It was a young girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old. Her dark skin stood out against the pale concrete, and her shoulders were hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Hank glanced at the clock on his dashboard. 11:42 p.m. Far too late for a child to be out alone. The blue glow of her phone screen illuminated her face as she stared intently at it, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. For a moment, Hank's hand hovered over the door handle, ready to step out and approach her. But something held him back. Maybe it was the weariness that had settled deep in his bones, or perhaps it was the nagging voice in his head that wondered if his intervention would even matter. Instead, he decided to observe from afar, at least for now. Hank eased the patrol car into a nearby parking spot, keeping the young girl in his line of sight. As he watched, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. What was she doing out here so late? Was she in trouble? Did she need help? These questions swirled in Hank's mind, stirring something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. For the first time in months, the monotony of his routine was broken. Here was someone who might need his help, someone he could potentially make a difference for. As the minutes ticked by, Hank found himself torn between his instinct to approach the girl and his hesitation to interfere. He knew all too well how delicate these situations could be, especially given the current climate of distrust between law enforcement and the black community. Night after night, Sheriff Hank Douglas found himself drawn back to the gas station. Each time, without fail, the young girl was there, a small figure huddled on the curb. His concern grew with each passing evening, as did his curiosity about her situation. Hank watched from his patrol car, noting how the girl always seemed to be alone. Her thin, worn-out dress barely seemed enough to keep out the chill of the night air. There she was, now sleeping in the corner of the gas station with her bag on her arms. As the days turned into weeks, Hank's unease deepened. Was she in some kind of danger? Or perhaps up to something suspicious? The seasoned lawman in him couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One particularly chilly evening, Hank made a decision. He couldn't stand by and watch any longer. With a deep breath, he stepped out of his patrol car and approached the girl. "Hey, kid," Hank said softly, trying not to startle her. "What's your name? Mind if I ask why you're out here so late?" Mia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of fear. She quickly pocketed her phone and stood up, her posture tense. "Mia, my name is Mia. I'm just doing something," she mumbled, avoiding Hank's gaze. Hank's brow furrowed. He could sense the evasiveness in her answer. "It's awful late for a young kid like yourself to be out alone. Are you sure everything's all right?" Mia shifted uncomfortably, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "Yes, sir. Everything's fine. I'll be heading home soon." Despite her assurances, Hank couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The girl's evasive answers and nervous demeanor only heightened his suspicions, but he also knew that pushing too hard might only make her clam up more. "Well, if you're sure," Hank said, his voice laced with concern, "just remember, if you ever need any help, you can always come to the sheriff's office, day or night." Mia nodded quickly, still avoiding eye contact. "Thank you, sir. I'll remember that." As Hank walked back to his patrol car, he couldn't help but feel a mix of worry and frustration. He was certain now that there was more to Mia's story than she was letting on. But what could it be? And how could he help her if she wouldn't open up? Hank's patrol car rumbled down the quiet streets as he headed home, but his mind was far from peaceful. The image of Mia, huddled alone at the gas station, haunted him. As he pulled into his driveway, a nagging worry settled in his chest. Inside his modest house, Hank hung up his hat and badge, but he couldn't shake off his concerns as easily. He sank into his worn armchair, rubbing his tired eyes. "What's that girl's story?" he muttered to himself. As the night wore on, Hank's thoughts raced. Could Mia be homeless? Or maybe she was mixed up in something dangerous? The more he pondered, the more his sense of duty gnawed at him. He had to find out more. The next evening, Hank's patrol car rolled to a stop near the gas station. Sure enough, there was Mia, perched on the curb with her phone in hand. Taking a deep breath, Hank stepped out and approached her. "Evening, Mia," he said gently, trying to sound friendly rather than authoritative. Mia looked up, her eyes wary but not unfriendly. "Hello, Sheriff," she replied softly. Hank gestured to the empty space beside her. "Mind if I sit for a spell?" After a moment's hesitation, Mia nodded. Hank lowered himself onto the curb, his knees creaking in protest. "Nice night, isn't it?" Hank said, looking up at the star-filled sky. Mia nodded again, her eyes darting between Hank and her phone. "You know," Hank continued, his voice gentle, "I can't help but wonder why a young kid like yourself spends so much time here every night. Is everything okay at home?" Mia's shoulders tensed, but she didn't run. Instead, she let out a small sigh. "Everything's fine, Sheriff. Really." Hank nodded, not pushing too hard. "I'm glad to hear that. But you know, if there was something wrong, you could tell me. It's my job to help folks after all." There was a long pause. Mia's fingers fidgeted with her phone case. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I come here for the Wi-Fi." Hank's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The Wi-Fi?" Mia nodded, her cheeks flushing slightly. "We can't afford internet at home. I need it for my schoolwork. The gas station lets me use theirs for free." Hank felt a mixture of relief and sadness wash over him. "Every night for your schoolwork?" "Yes, sir," Mia replied, her voice gaining a hint of pride. "I'm trying to keep my grades up. I want to go to college someday." Hank's heart swelled with admiration for this determined young girl. He realized there was much more to Mia's story than he had initially thought. Hank felt his heart sink as he listened to Mia's story unfold. The young girl's words, spoken softly but with a strength beyond her years, painted a picture of struggle and determination that left the seasoned sheriff stunned. "My mom, Marita, she works all the time," Mia explained, her eyes fixed on her worn sneakers. "Ever since Dad passed away, it's been really tough." Hank's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry, Mia. That must be really hard on you and your family." Mia nodded, her fingers tracing the cracks in her phone screen. "Mom does her best, but there's never enough money. That's why we can't afford internet at home." As Mia continued to share her story, Hank felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His eyes welled up with tears, and he blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. "But I can't fall behind in school," Mia said, a hint of determination creeping into her voice. "I have to keep my grades up if I want to go to college someday." That was the moment Hank's composure crumbled. A sob escaped his lips and he quickly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mia looked up, surprised by the sheriff's emotional response. "I'm sorry," Hank said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's just, you're so young, Mia. You shouldn't have to face all this." Mia's eyes softened. "It's okay, Sheriff. We're getting by." Hank shook his head, overwhelmed by the unfairness of it all. Here was this bright, determined young girl, facing hardships that would break most adults. Yet she sat here every night, working on her homework, refusing to let her circumstances define her future. "You're an incredible young lady, Mia," Hank said, his voice filled with admiration. "Your strength, your determination, it's truly inspiring." Mia blushed slightly at the compliment, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I just want to make my mom proud," she said softly. "And maybe someday, I can help make things better for us." Hank felt a renewed sense of purpose stirring within him. He realized that his job wasn't just about keeping the peace, it was about helping people like Mia, who were silently fighting battles every day. Hank sat quietly for a moment, absorbing everything Mia had shared. He looked at the young girl with newfound respect and admiration. "Mia," he said gently, "can you tell me more about why you work so hard in school?" Mia's eyes lit up and she sat up a little straighter. "Well, Sheriff Hank, it's not just for me," she began, her voice filled with determination. "I want to help my mom and my little brothers and sisters. They deserve a better life." As Mia spoke, Hank listened intently, his heart swelling with emotion. "I have this dream," Mia continued, her gaze drifting off into the distance. "I want to go to college someday. I want to get a really good job, one that pays well. Then I can take care of my family." Hank nodded, encouraging her to go on. "Mom works so hard, but it's never enough," Mia said, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't want her to struggle anymore. I don't want my siblings to worry about things kids shouldn't have to worry about." Hank felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to Mia's selfless words. Here was a child, barely a teenager, thinking about supporting her entire family. "That's why I come here every night," Mia explained, gesturing to her surroundings. "I know it's not much, but if I can keep my grades up, maybe I can get a scholarship. Then I can make all of this hard work count." Hank was struck by the maturity in Mia's words. This wasn't just a child doing homework. This was a young woman with a mission, driven by love for her family. "Mia," Hank said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are an extraordinary young lady. Your family is lucky to have you." Mia blushed slightly at the compliment. "I just want to make things better for them," she said softly. In that moment, Hank felt a surge of determination. He knew he had to help this remarkable girl achieve her dreams. Her selflessness, her love for her family, and her unwavering determination had touched something deep within him. "Well, Mia," Hank said, a new resolve in his voice, "I think it's about time someone helped you too. You shouldn't have to face all this alone." Hank returned to his office, his mind heavy with thoughts of Mia and her family. He couldn't shake the image of the young girl huddled outside the gas station, desperately trying to keep up with her studies. With a deep sigh, he settled into his creaky chair and began to dig deeper into the family's situation. As he sifted through public records and made a few discreet phone calls, the full extent of their struggles became clear. Merida, Mia's mother, was working herself to the bone. She had taken on multiple jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, and even picking up odd jobs on weekends. Despite her tireless efforts, they were barely staying afloat. Hank's heart sank when he discovered they were facing foreclosure on their trailer. The thought of Mia and her siblings losing their home made his chest tighten with worry. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair as he pondered what to do. "I've got to help them somehow," he muttered to himself. But as soon as the words left his mouth, doubt crept in. What if he was overstepping? He was just the town sheriff, after all, not a social worker or a charity. Hank remembered the fierce pride in Merida's eyes when he had seen her around town. She was a woman who carried herself with dignity, despite her circumstances. He knew she might bristle at the idea of accepting help, especially from a virtual stranger. "Can't just barge in there with a handful of cash," Hank said to himself, shaking his head. "That'd be like a slap in the face to her pride." He stood up and paced his small office, his boots scuffing against the worn linoleum floor. He needed to find a way to help that wouldn't make Merida feel like a charity case, something that would give them a hand up, not a handout. As he pondered, his eyes fell on a flyer pinned to his bulletin board. It was advertising a job fair coming up in the neighboring town. An idea began to form in Hank's mind. Maybe he could help Marita find a better-paying job, one that would allow her to support her family without working herself to the bone. But even as he considered this, he knew it wasn't enough. They needed immediate help to keep their home. Hank's brow furrowed as he wrestled with the dilemma. How could he provide that help without wounding Merita's pride or making her feel indebted to him? Hank pulled up to the gas station, his heart heavy with concern for Mia and her family. As he stepped out of his patrol car, he spotted her in her usual spot, hunched over a textbook. The sight of her determination made his chest tighten with emotion. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Evening, Mia," he said softly. Mia looked up, her eyes wary but not unfriendly. "Hi, Sheriff Douglas." Hank held out a small paper bag. "Brought you some snacks. Thought you might be hungry." Mia hesitated for a moment before accepting the bag with a shy smile. "Thank you, sir." Hank settled down next to her, careful to give her space. "How's the studying going?" Mia's face lit up. "It's good. I'm working on my math homework right now." "Math, huh?" Hank chuckled. "Never was my strong suit." "I love it," Mia said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "Especially algebra. It's like solving puzzles." Hank's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's impressive, Mia. What other subjects do you like?" "Science is my favorite," Mia replied, her eyes shining. "Especially physics. I want to be an engineer someday." Hank felt a swell of pride for this young girl he barely knew. "An engineer? That's a big dream." Mia nodded, her face serious. "I know it'll be hard, but I'm going to do it. For my mom and my siblings. I want to give them a better life." Hank's throat tightened with emotion. He cleared it before speaking. "That's really admirable, Mia. You're a smart kid. I bet you'll make a great engineer." Mia ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise. "I hope so. I just need to keep my grades up and maybe get a scholarship." As they continued to talk, Hank's resolve to help strengthened. He couldn't let Mia's potential go to waste. This bright, determined girl deserved a chance to chase her dreams. "Listen, Mia," Hank said gently. "I want to help you and your family. Would it be okay if I talked to some folks in town about finding some resources for you all?" Mia looked uncertain. "I don't know, I should ask Mom first if that's okay." Hank nodded understandingly. "I get that, but sometimes it's okay to accept help when it's offered. We all need a hand now and then." Mia thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but please don't make Mom feel bad." "I promise," Hank said, his voice firm. "We'll do this right." As he left the gas station that night, Hank's mind was already racing with ideas. He'd start with the church group, then maybe the local business association. Surely between all of them they could find a way to help Mia and her family without wounding their pride. The next day, Hank sat at his desk, the phone cradled between his ear and shoulder. His fingers drummed restlessly on the worn surface as he listened to yet another polite rejection. "I understand. Thank you for your time," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment as he hung up. It was the third call he'd made that morning, and each one had ended the same way. The local church, the Lions Club, and now the community center. None of them had the resources to help Maya's family in any meaningful way. Hank leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He'd been so sure that someone in this tight-knit community would be able to help, but as the rejections piled up, he felt a growing sense of frustration and helplessness. "There's gotta be something," he muttered to himself, flipping through his notebook filled with scribbled names and numbers. He thought about Mia, her bright eyes filled with determination as she talked about her dreams. The image of her huddled outside the gas station, working so hard despite everything, made his chest ache. Hank stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet streets of the town he'd sworn to protect. He'd always believed that being a sheriff meant more than just enforcing laws. It was about taking care of people, especially those who needed it most. But now, faced with Mia's situation, he felt like he was failing. The system he'd relied on for so long seemed inadequate, unable to help a family that was trying so hard to help themselves. He turned back to his desk, his eyes falling on an envelope containing his latest paycheck. A thought began to form in his mind, one that made him both nervous and excited. What if he helped Mia's family himself? He had some savings, money he'd been putting aside for his retirement. It wasn't a fortune, but it might be enough to help them keep their home, at least for a while. The idea scared him. It was a big step, far beyond his usual duties as sheriff. What if it backfired? What if Mia's mother refused the help, seeing it as charity? Or worse, what if someone in town saw it as him overstepping his bounds? But then he thought of Mia again, of her siblings, of their mother working multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. He thought of the potential being wasted, of dreams being crushed under the weight of poverty. Hank's jaw set with determination. He knew the risks, but he also knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Time was running out for Mia's family, and if the usual channels couldn't help, maybe it was time for him to step up. He sat back down at his desk, his mind racing with possibilities and potential consequences. This wasn't a decision to be made lightly, but Hank felt in his gut that it might be the right thing to do. Hank sat in his patrol car watching the sun dip below the horizon. His mind was racing with plans and possibilities. He knew he had to be careful, but he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The next morning, Hank made his way to the trailer park office. He spoke in hushed tones with the manager, sliding an envelope across the desk. "This is to cover part of the Douglas family's overdue rent," he said quietly. "But please, keep it anonymous." The manager nodded, a look of understanding passing between them. Later that week, Hank found himself in the school supply aisle of the local store. He filled a cart with notebooks, pencils, and everything else a student might need. As he paid, he asked the cashier to have it delivered to Mia's address. "Just say it's from a community donation," Hank instructed, his voice gruff, but his eyes soft. The biggest challenge came when Hank approached Tom, the owner of the local tech shop. Tom was known for his grumpy demeanor, but Hank knew he had a good heart underneath it all. "Tom, I need a favor," Hank said, leaning on the counter. Tom raised an eyebrow. "What kind of favor?" Hank explained Mia's situation, watching as Tom's expression softened. "I've got an old laptop," Tom said finally. "It's not the newest, but it works. I could donate it, I suppose." Hank felt a wave of relief wash over him. "That would be perfect, Tom. Thank you." A few days later, Hank saw Mia at the gas station. She was beaming, her fingers flying over the keys of a laptop. "Sheriff Douglas," she called out. "Look what we got. Some anonymous donor gave us this laptop. Can you believe it?" Hank felt a warmth spread through his chest. "That's wonderful, Mia. I'm happy for you." As he walked away, Hank couldn't help but smile. He knew these were just small steps, temporary solutions to a bigger problem. But seeing the joy on Mia's face, he felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. Still, a nagging thought persisted. How long could he keep this up? And what would happen when these small gestures weren't enough anymore? Hank sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. His mind was filled with thoughts of Mia and her family. The small gestures he'd made so far felt like drops in an ocean of need. He knew he had to do more, but what? Picking up his phone, Hank scrolled through his contacts. He paused at the name of his old friend, Bill, who worked at the local community college. "Hey, Bill," Hank said when his friend answered. "I need some advice." As Hank explained Mia's situation, he felt a lump form in his throat. It surprised him how emotional he was getting. "You know," Bill said thoughtfully, "we have a scholarship program for promising students from low-income families. It's not much, but it could help." Hank's heart leapt. "That could be perfect, Bill, thanks." After hanging up, Hank leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. He'd never felt this invested in someone's life before. Sure, he'd helped people as a lawman, but this was different. This was personal. He thought back to all the cases he'd worked on over the years. The faces of people he'd helped blurred together, but Mia's stood out clear as day, Her determination, her love for her family, her bright smile when she got that laptop, it all touched something deep inside him. Hank realized he was treading in unfamiliar waters. As a sheriff, he'd always kept a professional distance. But now, he found himself caring deeply about what happened to Mia and her family. Am I getting too involved? He wondered aloud. The empty kitchen offered no answer. Hank stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. He knew he had to be careful. He didn't want to overstep or make Mia's family uncomfortable. But he also couldn't just sit back and do nothing. With a sigh, Hank picked up his phone again. He had more calls to make, more favors to ask. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to do everything in his power to help Mia succeed. Hank stood at the steps of the local church, his heart pounding. He'd never been much for asking for help, but this was different. This was for Maya. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy wooden doors. Inside, Pastor Jim greeted him with a warm smile. "Sheriff Douglas, what brings you here today?" Hank cleared his throat. "I need your help, Jim. It's about a family in our community." As Hank shared Mia's story, he watched the pastor's face soften with compassion. When he finished, Pastor Jim nodded slowly. "This is exactly the kind of situation our church should be helping with," he said. "What did you have in mind?" Hank's shoulders relaxed a little. "I was thinking we could organize a fundraiser, maybe a bake sale, a charity drive, anything to help them out." Pastor Jim's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea, Hank. Let me call a meeting with the church committee right away." Over the next few days, Hank threw himself into planning the fundraiser. He spent hours on the phone, calling local businesses for donations. He put up flyers all over town, his hands rough from the tape and staples. The church members rallied around the cause. Mrs. Johnson offered to organize a bake sale. Mr. Peterson volunteered to run a charity car wash. Even the kids got involved, planning a lemonade stand. Hank was touched by the community's response. It reminded him why he loved this small town so much. Despite his busy schedule, Hank made sure to visit Mia at the gas station every evening. He'd bring her a sandwich or a hot chocolate, watching as she worked diligently on her homework. "How's that math problem coming along?" he asked one night, settling down next to her. Mia looked up, her face brightening. "I think I've almost got it, Sheriff Douglas. Want to see?" As Mia explained the problem, Hank felt a surge of pride. This girl was going places, and he was going to make sure she had every chance to succeed. "You're doing great, Mia," he said, giving her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Keep it up." Mia smiled shyly. "Thanks, Sheriff. I don't know what I'd do without your help." Hank felt his throat tighten with emotion. He cleared it quickly. "Just doing my job, kiddo. Now, let's take another look at that equation." As they bent their heads over the textbook, Hank felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He knew the fundraiser was just the beginning. Whatever it took, he was going to help Mia and her family find a brighter future. The day of the fundraiser dawned bright and clear, as if even the weather was smiling on their efforts. Hank arrived at the church parking lot early, his stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. He watched as volunteers bustled about, setting up tables and hanging colorful banners. Mrs. Johnson's bake sale table was already piled high with homemade pies and cookies. The smell of fresh pastries filled the air, making Hank's mouth water. Across the lot, Mr. Peterson was organizing the car wash, hoses and buckets at the ready. As the morning wore on, people began to trickle in. Soon, the trickle became a steady stream. Hank's heart swelled as he saw familiar faces from all over town. There was old Mr. Granger, who rarely left his house these days, and the busy Thompson family, all 6 of them pitching in to help. Children ran around selling lemonade, their excited voices filling the air. Cars lined up for the wash, their owners chatting and laughing as they waited. The bake sale table was doing a roaring trade, with Mrs. Johnson's famous apple pie selling out in minutes. Hank moved through the crowd, shaking hands and thanking people. He couldn't help but feel a lump in his throat at the outpouring of support. This was what community was all about. As the day drew to a close, Hank gathered with Pastor Jim and the other organizers to count the proceeds. When the final tally was announced, A cheer went up. They had raised far more than anyone had dared to hope. Hank's eyes misted over. This money would make a real difference to Mia and her family. It would keep a roof over their heads, food on their table, and most importantly, it would give Mia a chance to keep pursuing her dreams. The next evening, Hank made his way to the gas station, his heart full. He found Mia in her usual spot, bent over her textbooks. When she looked up and saw him, her face broke into a smile. "Sheriff Douglas, you won't believe what happened," Mia exclaimed, her eyes shining. "Someone from the church came by our house today. They told us about the fundraiser and gave Mom an envelope. Sheriff, there was so much money in there," Mom cried, and so did I. Hank felt his own eyes welling up. "That's wonderful, Mia. This town, it's full of good people who want to help." Mia nodded, wiping her eyes. "I can't believe so many people cared enough to do this for us. It's like a miracle." Hank sat down beside her, his heart full of joy. "You deserve it, Mia. You and your family. You've been so brave and hardworking. We all just wanted to show you that you're not alone." As Mia threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug, Hank felt a deep sense of accomplishment wash over him. This was why he had become a sheriff in the first place, to make a difference in people's lives. And today, with the help of this amazing community, he had done just that. Next morning, Hank's truck rumbled to a stop outside Mia's modest trailer home. His heart raced with excitement as he clutched the envelope containing the fundraiser proceeds. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out and walked up to the door, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. He knocked, and after a moment, Mia's beaming face appeared. "Sheriff Douglas, come in, please." Hank entered the small, tidy living room where Merida sat on a worn couch, her face etched with curiosity and a hint of wariness. "Ma'am," Hank nodded respectfully, "I've got some news I'd like to share with you both." Merida straightened, her eyes fixed on Hank. "What kind of news?" Hank cleared his throat. "Well, the community came together for a fundraiser. We wanted to help out you and your family." He held out the envelope. "This is for you." Merida's eyes widened as she took the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, and a small gasp escaped her lips when she saw the amount. This is too much," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Mia bounced on her toes, her face glowing. "Isn't it amazing, Mom? The whole town helped." For a moment, Merida's eyes shimmered with tears, but then something shifted in her expression. Her jaw tightened, and she set the envelope down on the coffee table. "I appreciate the thought, Sheriff," she said, her voice suddenly cool. "But we don't need charity. We've been managing just fine on our own." Hank blinked, taken aback by the sudden change. "Ma'am, it's not charity. The town just wanted to show their support." "Support?" Merida cut in, her voice rising. "We're not some charity case for people to feel good about helping. I work hard to provide for my family. We don't need handouts." Mia's smile faded and she looked between her mother and Hank, confusion clear on her face. Hank held up his hands, trying to calm the situation. "I understand, Merida. Nobody thinks you're not capable. We just wanted to lend a hand. Neighbor to neighbor." Merida stood up, her posture rigid. "I've been taking care of my family since my husband passed. We've made it this far without anyone's help, and we'll keep going. I won't have people pitying us." Hank could see the pride burning in Merida's eyes, mixed with a fierce determination. He recognized it, the need to prove oneself, to stand on one's own 2 feet. It was admirable, but in this case it was also holding her back from accepting much-needed help. Mia's eyes darted between her mother and Hank, her heart sinking. The joy she'd felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a heavy weight in her chest. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to her mother. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "please don't turn this away. It could help us so much." Merida's eyes softened as she looked at her daughter, but her jaw remained set. "Honey, we don't need handouts. We're strong enough to make it on our own." Mia shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "But Mom, it's not a handout. It's our neighbors wanting to help. Remember how Mr. Johnson from next door helped fix our leaky roof last summer? This is just like that, but bigger." Hank watched the exchange, his heart heavy. He could see the pain in Maya's eyes, the desperate hope that her mother would understand. But Merita's pride was a formidable barrier. "It's different, Mia," Merita insisted. "We can't take money from people. What will they think of us?" "They'll think we're part of the community," Mia pleaded. "They'll know we're grateful for their kindness. Mom, please. This could help me with my studies. Help us keep our home." Merita's resolve wavered for a moment, but she shook her head again. "We'll find another way, sweetie. We always do." Hank felt a knot forming in his stomach. He'd wanted so badly to help this family, to make a real difference in their lives. But now, it seemed his efforts had only caused more stress and tension. He watched as Mia's shoulders slumped in defeat, her eyes cast down to the floor. "I'm sorry," Hank said quietly. "I never meant to cause any trouble. I just thought, well, I guess I didn't think it through properly." Merita's expression softened slightly as she looked at the sheriff. "You meant well, I know that. But we can't accept this. It's not right." Hank nodded, feeling a deep sense of frustration and helplessness. He'd been so sure this would be the answer, the way to truly help Mia and her family. But now he wondered if he'd done more harm than good. Had he overstepped? Should he have left well enough alone? As he prepared to leave, Hank caught Mia's eye. The disappointment and sadness he saw there made his heart ache. He'd wanted to be a source of hope for this bright, determined young girl. Instead, he felt as though he'd let her down. That afternoon, Hank sat in his patrol car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The disappointment of Merita's rejection weighed heavily on his heart. He couldn't shake the image of Mia's crestfallen face from his mind. With a deep sigh, he started the engine and drove to the local church. Pastor Jim was tending to the flower beds when Hank pulled up. The older man straightened, wiping his brow as Hank approached. "Sheriff Douglas," he greeted warmly. "What brings you by?" Hank's shoulders slumped. "I need some advice, Pastor. It's about Mia's family." The two men settled on a nearby bench, and Hank poured out his concerns. He explained Merita's refusal to accept the community's help and his fear that he'd only made things worse. Pastor Jim listened patiently, nodding in understanding. When Hank finished, the pastor placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Hank," he said gently, "your heart was in the right place. Sometimes people need time to accept help, especially when they've been struggling on their own for so long." Hank nodded, feeling a small measure of relief. "But what if I've ruined any chance of helping them?" The pastor smiled. "You haven't. Merita's pride is strong, but so is a mother's love for her child. Give her time to process this. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to show them they're not alone." As Hank mulled over the pastor's words, an idea began to form in his mind. He remembered his own struggles growing up, how hard it had been to accept help when it was offered. "Maybe," Hank said slowly, "if I shared my own story with Merita, she might understand better. Show her that accepting help doesn't make her weak." Pastor Jim's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea, Hank. Personal connections can often bridge the gaps that good intentions alone can't cross." Feeling a renewed sense of purpose, Hank thanked the pastor and stood up. He knew what he had to do now. He couldn't force Merita to accept the community's generosity, but he could offer her something equally valuable: understanding and empathy. As Hank walked back to his car, he began to plan how he would approach Merita. He would share his own experiences of growing up in poverty, of sacrificing his education so his siblings could study. He would tell her about the people who had reached out to help him along the way, and how accepting that help had changed his life. Hank hoped that by opening up about his own past, he could show Merita that accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a chance to build a better future for her family. With renewed determination, he set off to find Merita, ready to share his story and hopefully change her mind. Next day, Hank took a deep breath as he stood outside Merita's modest trailer. The evening air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. He knocked gently on the door, his heart pounding with nervous energy. Merita opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw Hank. "Sheriff Douglas, what are you doing here?" "Evening, Merita," Hank said softly. "I was hoping we could talk for a bit. May I come in?" Merita hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. The small living room was tidy but worn, with mismatched furniture and faded curtains. Hank sat down on the edge of a threadbare couch, while Merida perched on a nearby chair, her posture stiff and guarded. "I wanted to share something with you," Hank began, his voice gentle. "Something about my own life that I think might help you understand why I'm so keen on helping your family." Merida's eyebrows raised slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Hank took another deep breath. "I grew up poor, Merida. Really poor. My folks could barely keep food on the table for me and my siblings." He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. "When I was about Mia's age, things got real tough. My parents couldn't afford to send all of us to school anymore." Merida's expression softened slightly, a flicker of recognition passing over her face. "I made a choice," Hank continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I stopped going to school so my younger brothers and sisters could keep studying. I figured I was the oldest, so I should be the one to sacrifice." Tears welled up in Merida's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "It was hard, Merida, so hard. But you know what? People in our community saw what was happening. They reached out to help. At first, my folks were too proud to accept it. But eventually, they realized that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was giving us kids a chance at a better future." Hank leaned forward, his eyes meeting Merida's. "That's all I want for Mia, for all your children. A chance at a better future. Accepting help doesn't make you weak, Merida. It makes you strong enough to put your children's needs first." Merida's lips trembled and she looked away, blinking rapidly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I understand what you're saying, Sheriff, but it's not easy to accept charity." Hank nodded. "I know it's not. But think of it this way. It's not charity. It's your community investing in Mia's future, in all your children's futures." Merida was quiet for a long moment, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally, she looked back at Hank, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'll think about it, Sheriff. I can't promise anything, but I'll think about it." Hank felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. He stood up slowly, giving Merida a gentle smile. "That's all I ask, Merida. Thank you for listening." As he headed towards the door, Merida called out softly, "Sheriff?" Hank turned back. "Yes?" "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for sharing your story, for caring about us." Hank nodded, his own eyes misting over. "You're welcome, Merida. You and your family are worth caring about." As Hank prepared to leave, Mia quietly entered the room. Her eyes darted between her mother and the sheriff, sensing the emotional tension in the air. She hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Mom, I couldn't help but overhear," Mia said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Can I say something?" Merida nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. Hank sat back down, giving Mia an encouraging smile. Mia took a deep breath and looked directly at her mother. "Mom, I know you're worried about taking help from others, but I think we need to, for our future." Merida's eyes widened, surprised by her daughter's boldness. Mia continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "I want to work hard, Mom. I want to study and get good grades and go to college, but it's so hard without the right tools, without internet at home." Mia's voice cracked slightly. "I don't want us to struggle like this forever. I want to make things better for you and for my siblings." Tears welled up in Merida's eyes as she listened to her daughter. She had no idea Mia had been carrying such a heavy burden. "If we accept help now," Mia said, her voice growing stronger, "I promise I'll work twice as hard. I'll make sure it pays off. I'll get a good job and take care of all of us. You'll never have to work so hard again, Mom." Merida's tears spilled over and she reached out to pull Mia into a tight hug. "Oh, baby," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I had no idea you were feeling all this." Hank watched the scene unfold, his own eyes misty. He could see Merida's resolve starting to crumble. After a long moment, Merida pulled back, looking at Mia with a mix of pride and sadness. "You shouldn't have to worry about all this, sweetheart. It's my job to take care of you." Mia shook her head. "We're a family, Mom. We take care of each other. And sometimes that means letting others help us too." Merida looked from Mia to Hank and back again. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and she let out a long sigh. I'm still not comfortable with the idea of charity," she admitted. "But maybe you're both right. Maybe I need to think about this differently." Hank's mind raced as he watched Merida and Mia embrace. He could see the change in Merida's eyes, a flicker of hope mixed with uncertainty. Suddenly, an idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. "I think I might have a solution," Hank said, his voice filled with newfound energy. "What if we create something that could help not just your family, but the whole community?" Merida and Maya looked at him curiously, waiting for him to continue. "We could set up a community library," Hank explained, his excitement growing with each word. "It would have free Wi-Fi and lots of books and computers for everyone to use. That way, Mia, you wouldn't have to go to the gas station anymore to do your homework." Mia's eyes widened, a spark of hope lighting up her face. "Really? We could have a place like that in our town?" Hank nodded, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Absolutely. And it wouldn't just be for you. Other families who might be struggling could use it too. It would be a place for everyone to learn and grow." Merida listened quietly, her brow furrowed in thought. "And how would this work? Who would pay for it?" "We could use some of the money from the fundraiser to get started," Hank explained. "But we'd also ask for donations from local businesses and apply for grants. The whole town could pitch in to make it happen." As Hank spoke, he could feel a renewed sense of purpose flooding through him. This wasn't just about helping one family anymore. It was about lifting up the entire community. "Think about it," he continued, his voice warm and encouraging. "Kids could get help with their homework. Adults could use the computers to look for jobs or learn new skills. It would be a safe place for everyone to gather and support each other." Mia's eyes were shining now. "Mom, can you imagine I could study there after school, and maybe even help other kids with their math homework?" Marida's expression softened as she looked at her daughter's excited face. She turned back to Hank, a hint of a smile on her lips. "It does sound like a wonderful idea," she admitted. "And if it's for the whole community, not just us?" Hank nodded, understanding her unspoken thoughts. "It wouldn't be charity, Merida. It would be neighbors helping neighbors, making our town stronger together." As Hank watched Merida and Mia exchange hopeful glances, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, filled with purpose and possibility. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. This library could be the start of something beautiful for their little town, and he was determined to make it happen. As word spread about the community library project, the small town came alive with excitement. Hank found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, coordinating efforts and rallying support from every corner of the community. The local hardware store donated building materials, while the high school woodshop class volunteered to build shelves. The town's book club organized a massive book drive, collecting gently used books from attics and basements across the county. Even the tech-savvy teenagers pitched in, setting up the computers and Wi-Fi network. Hank watched in awe as the old abandoned storefront on Main Street transformed into a warm, inviting space. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, and colorful rugs dotted the floor. Comfortable chairs and study tables filled the room, creating cozy nooks for reading and learning. As he stood in the doorway of the nearly finished library, Hank felt a lump form in his throat. He thought back to those lonely nights patrolling the streets, wondering if he was making a difference. Now, looking at the bustling volunteers and the growing collection of books, he knew without a doubt that he had. "Sheriff Douglas?" a soft voice called from behind him. Hank turned to see Mia, her arms full of donated textbooks. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything." Hank smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "No need to thank me, Mia. This is all of us working together." Mia shook her head, her eyes shining with determination. "But you started it all. You saw me at the gas station and you cared. You didn't just drive by." Hank felt his heart swell with emotion. He placed a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder. "Well, I'm glad I stopped, and I'm even gladder to see what it's turned into." As they stood there, Merida approached carrying a tray of lemonade for the volunteers. Her face, once creased with worry, now glowed with pride and hope. "Hank," she said, her voice warm, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for your stubbornness. This library, it's going to change lives." Hank chuckled, accepting a glass of lemonade. "It already has, Merida. It already has." The three of them looked out over the library, watching as their neighbors and friends worked side by side, shelving books and arranging furniture. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation, a far cry from the quiet, isolated town Hank had patrolled just months ago. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the library's new windows, Hank felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle in his chest. This library wasn't just a building filled with books. It was a symbol of what their community could achieve when they came together. It was a beacon of hope, a promise of a brighter future for everyone in town, especially for bright young minds like Mia's. The grand opening of the community library was a joyous occasion for the entire town. Ribbons were cut, speeches were made, and the doors were finally thrown open to the public. Mia was among the first to step inside, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the rows of books, the gleaming computers, and the cozy study nooks. As Mia settled into a comfortable chair with her backpack, Hank couldn't help but smile. He watched her pull out her textbooks and plug in her laptop, finally able to work without worrying about the cold or the late hour. "How's it feel, Mia?" Hank asked, approaching her table. Mia looked up, her face beaming. "It's amazing, Sheriff Douglas. I can't believe this is real." Hank chuckled softly. "It's as real as it gets, and please call me Hank." Over the next few weeks, the library became a bustling center of activity. Hank made it a point to stop by regularly, checking in on Mia and offering help to other students who came to use the facility. One afternoon, Hank noticed a young boy struggling with a math problem. He gently approached and offered his assistance. The boy's face lit up as Hank patiently explained the concept, and soon enough, other children were gathering around, eager for help with their own homework. Mia watched from her usual spot, a warm smile on her face. She saw how Hank's eyes crinkled with joy as he helped the younger kids, and she realized that he had found a new purpose in life. As the days passed, the library's impact on the town became increasingly evident. Parents reported improved grades, and teachers noticed a renewed enthusiasm for learning among their students. The space wasn't just for studying, it had become a place where the community could come together, share knowledge, and support one another. Hank's heart swelled with pride every time he walked through the library doors. He saw Mia tutoring younger students, watched as elderly residents learned to use computers for the first time, and overheard animated book discussions in the reading corner. One evening, as Hank was locking up the library, Mia approached him. "Hank," she said, her voice filled with gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you again. This library, it changed everything for me. For all of us." Hank felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at Mia, seeing not just the determined girl from the gas station, but a bright future full of possibilities. "You're welcome, Mia," he said softly. "But remember, this is your achievement too. Your hard work and dedication inspired all of this." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Hank realized that his once monotonous life had been transformed. The library had become a testament to the power of community and the difference one person could make. And as he watched Mia head home with a stack of books under her arm, Hank knew that his journey was far from over. Days turned into weeks. Hank pulled up to Merida's modest trailer, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He hadn't seen her since the library's grand opening, and he was eager to check on how she and Mia were doing. As he stepped out of his patrol car, he took a deep breath, hoping this visit would go smoothly. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, Merida appeared. Her face showed signs of exhaustion, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Sheriff Douglas," she said, her voice soft. "Please come in." Hank stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. The small living room was tidy, with a few of Maya's textbooks scattered on the coffee table. "How are you and Mia doing?" Hank asked, his tone gentle. Merida gestured for him to sit and settled into a worn armchair across from him. We're doing better," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Mia loves the library. She's there every day after school." Hank nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad to hear that." Merida's eyes welled up with tears. "Sheriff Hank," she corrected herself, "I want to thank you for everything you've done. For us. For the community." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "But I need to tell you something." Hank leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "What is it, Merida?" "Accepting help," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do." The tears she'd been holding back began to fall. "I've always been so proud, so determined to do everything on my own. But when I saw how much it meant to Mia, how much it could change our lives, I knew I had to swallow my pride." Hank felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out and gently patted Merida's hand. "You did the right thing, Merida. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it." Merida nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know that now, but it wasn't easy. I felt like I was failing as a mother, like I couldn't provide for my own children." "You haven't failed anyone," Hank said firmly. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. And you know what? The community is stronger because we all came together to help. It's not just about you and Mia anymore. We've all grown from this experience." Merida looked at Hank, her eyes filled with gratitude and a newfound respect. For the first time since they'd met, she let her guard down completely. "Thank you, Hank, for everything. For not giving up on us even when I pushed you away." Hank felt his own eyes growing misty. "That's what community is all about, Merida. We look out for each other, and I'm just glad I could be here for you and Mia." Seasons change, and Hank found himself spending more and more time with Mia and Merida. The small trailer that once felt so foreign to him now felt like a second home. On this particular afternoon, Hank pulled up in his patrol car, a smile spreading across his face as he saw Mia waving from the window. "Sheriff Hank," Mia called out as he approached the door. "I got an A on my math test." Hank's eyes crinkled with pride. "That's fantastic, Mia. I knew you could do it." Merida appeared behind her daughter, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Come on in, Hank. We're just about to have dinner." As Hank stepped inside, he noticed a pile of laundry in the corner. Without a word, he made his way over and started folding the clothes. Merida watched him, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "You don't have to do that, Hank," she said softly. "I know," he replied with a gentle smile, "but I want to." Later, as they sat around the small kitchen table, Mia pulled out her homework. "Sheriff Hank, can you help me with this science project? We're studying the solar system." Hank's eyes lit up. "Of course, let's take a look." As they pored over the textbook together, Merida watched them from the sink where she was washing dishes. She marveled at how naturally Hank had become a part of their lives, filling a void she hadn't even realized was there. "You know," Mia said, looking up at Hank with admiration, "when I grow up, I want to be just like you, someone who helps people and makes a difference." Hank felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out and gently ruffled Mia's hair. "You already make a difference, Mia. Every single day." As the evening wore on, Hank found himself lingering, not wanting to leave. He helped Mia finish her homework, fixed a leaky faucet in the bathroom, and even read a bedtime story to Mia's younger siblings. When it was finally time for him to go, Mia hugged him tightly. "Thank you for everything, Sheriff Hank," she whispered. Hank hugged her back, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. As he walked to his car, he realized that the weariness and isolation he had felt before meeting Mia and Merida had disappeared. In its place was a sense of purpose and belonging he hadn't experienced in years. As Hank drove home that evening, his mind wandered back to the first time he'd seen Mia sitting alone outside the gas station. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet it had only been a few months. He remembered the concern and curiosity that had stirred within him, urging him to investigate. A smile tugged at his lips as he recalled their first conversation. Mia had been so guarded, so afraid to open up. Now she greeted him with bright eyes and enthusiastic hugs. The transformation was remarkable. Hank pulled into his driveway and sat in his car for a moment, lost in thought. He realized that it wasn't just Mia who had changed. He, too, had undergone a profound transformation. Gone was the weary, isolated man who'd been counting down the days to retirement. In his place was someone with a renewed sense of purpose, someone who woke up each morning eager to make a difference. As he walked into his house, Hank's gaze fell on a framed photo of himself in his sheriff's uniform. He picked it up, studying it closely. The badge that had once felt like a heavy burden now filled him with pride. He wasn't just enforcing laws anymore, he was building a community. Hank thought about the community library, bustling with activity every day. He thought about Mia's improved grades and the spark of hope in Merida's eyes. He thought about the other families in town who were benefiting from the resources they'd put in place. A warmth spread through his chest as he realized how deeply connected he now felt to his town. It wasn't just a place he patrolled anymore. It was a network of people he cared about, people whose lives intertwined with his own. Hank sat down in his favorite chair, feeling a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. His work as a sheriff had taken on new meaning. He wasn't just keeping the peace, he was actively working to improve people's lives. Hank's patrol car pulled up to Mia and Marita's modest trailer. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. He grabbed a bag of groceries from the passenger seat and made his way to the front door. Marita greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. "Sheriff Douglas, you didn't have to bring anything," she said, her voice tinged with gratitude. Hank shrugged, a gentle expression on his face. "It's no trouble at all, Marita. And please, call me Hank." As he stepped inside, Mia looked up from her homework at the kitchen table. Her face lit up. "Hank, you're here!" She jumped up to give him a quick hug before returning to her studies. Hank set the groceries on the counter and began unpacking them. Marita moved to help, but he waved her off. "You sit down and rest. I've got this," he said kindly. As he put away the food, Hank glanced around the small living space. It was clean and tidy, but signs of wear were still visible. He made a mental note to see about getting some repairs done. "How's the homework coming along, Mia?" Hank asked, walking over to the table. Mia's brow furrowed in concentration. "It's tough, but I'm getting there. We're learning about algebra now." Hank pulled up a chair beside her. "Mind if I take a look?" For the next hour, Hank sat with Mia, offering guidance when she needed it. Merida watched from the couch, a look of contentment on her face. As the evening wore on, Hank helped Merida with some minor household chores. They chatted easily, their initial awkwardness long gone. Hank felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. Finally, as the night deepened, Hank prepared to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at Mia, still diligently working on her homework. A profound sense of peace washed over him. In that moment, Hank knew he wasn't just helping Mia succeed. He was part of something bigger, ensuring that their town remained a place where no one faced their struggles alone. As he watched Mia work, a feeling of deep contentment settled in his chest. The future looked bright for Mia, and Hank was proud to be a part of it. If you enjoyed the story of Sheriff Hank, Mia, and Marita, I hand-picked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.